Om. Howling moon deer. There is a story that has caught the ears of the old wise crones, both far and wide, that has taken root in the cauldron of their hearts. It is said that these crones ever so subtly lace this story within their healing incantations, that they speak beneath the moon tree just as the moon enters and gifts her light into an empty meadow. It is a story that has found its way to the ritualized fireside that is pluming with the fragrant sacred smoke of sage and cedar, frankincense, sweetgrass, copal. To the fire that is wet with prayer and song. A fire where only those stories that provoke remembrance and endangered knowledge are spoken. Now, strangely, in the way important stories are, it is a story of a deer that howls at the moon like a wolf. It is said her howl has such a felt longing in her cry that when heard, the old woodsmen who buried their hearts in a forgotten place, they have a tear breach the dry crust of their eye and feel an old stirring of broken longing. It is said, where that tear falls and reaches the fecund earth, a plant takes root and grows the following year. This plant is called Sekekawats Kolo by the Dene as deer eye, or most commonly known as Osha. Others call it bear root. Where did this howling moon come from? Why does she howl with such a longing? Only Raven seems to know, and it's by Raven's wings this story may have arrived. That's the thing about these kind of stories. They're not learned. They're not memorized. They arrive. Find a home inside you, in the spine. Take up residency. That's a good thing. It holds a scent of the remembrances that our ancestors exhaled onto the depicted stories painted on animal hides. See, stories of her come from many lands. Her story is known to those who know how to tune their ear to the sounds beneath the earth. They carry from as far as the northeast mountains of Russia to the Pyrenees of Spain, all the way to here within the Cascade Mountains of the Pacific Northwest. Her story is known. In our local Lushootseed language, she is known as Sekegawats, Si Sladai, dear woman longing. Her story is said to begin once upon a time beneath a time. Some say it is her story that hints to the origin of how our times came to be. Now that's something to pay attention to as you listen in. That her story hints to the origin of how our times came to be. Now the story actually begins with Wolf Woman. Wolf Woman loved being a wolf. I mean, who wouldn't? She had the thrill of running with her pack through mountains and forests, splashing through rivers. Her nose enraptured in the scent of the hunt. The felt resonance of howls that broke the night's silence. They were inscribed like holy mantras into her fur hairs. The howling chorus of the pack would enter her, be of her. There was a profound felt sense of belonging during those times. Can you imagine the feeling? Now here's another important part of this story. And that is, every full moon the wolves would gather in a particular meadow. Other clans would gather with them. Deer, rabbit, bear, elk, fox, moose, owl, other clans. One by one they would take off their animal skins and hang them on the branches of a hawthorn tree. Now without their skins, they would stand upright and become the two-legged humans. And from that hawthorn tree, they would take those hawthorn berries and they would weave tiaras, necklaces, and bracelets and adorn themselves. See, long ago, it's common knowledge all two-legged came from the ancestry of animals. In other words, us humans. We're descended from animals. Some are even descended from trees. And it said those who still connected to their animal skins hold a kind of original knowledge, original remembrance of being an extension of the earth streaming. Now when they had all gathered together, all the clans, and they gathered in festive spirits adorned in the hawthorn berries, the moon maiden would come down from the moon with large vats of moon milk that were harvested from a flower that grows only in the gardens of the moon palace. Now together they sang, they drank moon milk libations, they danced in the rhythmic drumming of the night. They felt their togetherness, this greater belonging of being of the all. And they experienced a kind of togetherness and connection where you may consider it's just very rare to even come across in today's modern times. Now, after the ritualized festivities, they would each slip back into their animal skins and return to playing their part amongst the forest. Now, it wasn't long after this when things began to change, however. The winter brought deep snows. The cold mountain winds carried strange sounds on its brittle lips that were unfamiliar to them. Fewer began tending the full moon gathering because fellow wolves and other animals were disappearing. No one knew why, nor where they went. It was a mystery. One snowy night, Wolf Woman got separated from her pack, and she was moved into a different part of the forest. And she caught scent of something strange and different. Now, despite herself, she couldn't help but follow it. She trailed it through that unknown part of the forest. There were no ravens in these woods. That should have alerted her, caused her to pause. But that strange scent had taken hold and was pulling her now. Eventually, she came across a hut in a meadow that had a trail of green smoke rising up out of the chimney, sparkling and glimmering like the northern lights, and it smelled like spice. In the snow, she could see there was a single track of a two-legged, a human, that went away from the hut, but strangely, she couldn't see any footprints going toward the hut. Wolf Woman was curious, followed the tracks backwards to that hut, cautiously peered in through that frosted pane window. There was a warm fire on the hearth, a scent of wild forage stew brewing, tallow candles lit. Everything looked inviting, but there was no sight of who dwelled there. As you can imagine, her paws were cold and numb. Her pelt was wet and caked in snow and ice. Wolfwoman was fatigued from that long trek to that winter snow-laden forest, and there was just no sign of her pack anywhere. She nudged the door open with her nose. She peered in with her yellow wolf eyes. No one was there. There was a soft and warm-looking robe hanging just inside the door. She took off her cold, wet wolfskin and hung it on the wooden peg beside the robe, and then, now as a two-legged, slipped that soft robe around her. Can you imagine that glorious feeling? That sense of letting the fatigue just release the warmth? She walked over to the stew brewing on the hearth fire and couldn't help but serve herself a bowl. Never had she had someone prepare a meal for her. Never had she not had to fight to claim her own nourishment. She saw hanging above the hearth fire was a flask of aged wine, and again, she couldn't help but pour herself a drink. Perhaps it was the warm meal in her belly, or the aged wine, or the hypnotic dance of the fire, but she found herself in the soft bed, fast asleep. She woke in the morning just after the hour of the wolf, and she was shocked to realize she had allowed herself to become so vulnerable. She looked around, and sure enough, no one was still there. She slipped her wolfskin on and trotted back into the forest, feeling relieved that nothing had happened. She went in search for her pack. She roamed far and wide, but she could not find them. The forest felt different, even unfamiliar. There were no tracks, no chorus of howls, no signs. She would howl out, but there was no response. She felt the beginnings of some kind of pain inside of her. It seemed later in the winter than before. Normally she would greet the plants she passed by and speak to them by name, but she couldn't remember all their names. Something was amiss. That evening, after anxiously, tiringly searching for her pack all day, feeling alone and slightly lost, she caught that same strange scent, and she couldn't help but follow it back through those heavy snows to that mysterious hut in the meadow. Again, the trail of green smoke rose up out of the chimney like the glimmering northern lights, smelling like spice. This time, there weren't any tracks coming from nor toward the hut, not even hers. She thought that strange. But she carefully approached, peered in the window. She saw the same as the night before, the scent of wild forage stew on the crackling fire, the soft glow of tallow candles, and yet no one appeared to be home. Again, Wolfwoman nosed open the door and with her yellow wolf eyes scanned the room. Sure enough, no one was home. She took off her wolfskin, hung it on the hook, and slipped comfortably into the soft robe and rabbit-furred lined slippers that she had found. She helped herself to the warm stew, the wine, and eventually the soft bed. She woke startled and disappointed she had let her guard down again. She looked around. The fire was cooling, but no one was around. She slipped on her wolfskin and trotted back into the forest, vowing never to come back again. In the early morning light, the moon hung just above the mountain. It was nearly full. She stopped in her tracks, nearly full. Wolfwoman was sure that she had entered that hut when there was only a sliver of the moon waxing. Had she been there for more than one day? Where is her wolf pack? She began to search, but she found the forest was even more unfamiliar to her. That she seemed to be unfamiliar to the forest. She knew this was her forest, but it seemed distant, changed, unknown to her. She felt a pain inside of her grow. Seeing the plants and trees have moved, and she seemed to have forgotten more of their names. That evening, after searching and searching, trying to remember things forgotten, she caught scent again and followed it back to that strange hut. She told herself not to go in, told herself to not even approach and peer in the window, but something had taken hold inside her. As she couldn't resist the warmth of the fire, the taste of stew, the wine, the soft bed. After all, her wolf pack was nowhere to be seen, and it was quite cold and lonely without them. She entered, took off her wolfskin for the very last time. When she woke in the morning, the fire had cooled, and the warmth in the room had left. She went over to put on her wolf skin, but it was no longer there. Frantically, she looked all around. She went outside to look for tracks of who could have came and went, but there were none. Instead, she noticed the snows had gone, and it was actually early spring. How long had she slept? How long had she slept? Without her wolfskin, she felt the cold. She felt strange and disconnected. Then she noticed a door she hadn't seen before. She opened it, and it creaked. Stairs descended down into a cellar. There was a soft light, and she attentively, cautiously, took one step then another, ever listening, ever smelling, and sensing for what may be down there. When she got to the bottom, she found all sorts of animal skins hanging on the walls. There was fox and rabbit and deer and muskrat, but no wolf skin, not her skin. All the skins were old and torn except for one, a deer skin. She knew she couldn't stay another night in this hut. Some spell or enchantment had occurred. She took the deer skin, put it on, and ran back out into the woods, now not as wolf, but as deer. She found not only had seasons changed, but many years had passed. She barely recognized the forest, and the forest did not recognize her. There were no signs of her wolf pack. She could feel a forgetfulness, a loss of memory. When the full moon came, she went out to that meadow, but no one came. Not deer, nor fox, nor elk, nor rabbit, and not her pack. She howled up to the moon, but the moon maiden didn't come. There were no vats of moon milk, no sense of all the animals taking the day to come together. There was no dancing and song. There was only the silence and the sad beauty of the cool moonlight in the empty meadow. Now, not quite deer, not quite wolf, not quite moon. A longing of restoring her original belonging took hold of her. She howled with a longing felt in her whole being, and till this day, she continues to search for what was forgotten and the scent of her original skin. People from many lands speak of the howling moon deer and the felt stirring they feel in themselves, of a longing for their own skins, their true skins, and what has been forgotten, but is yet felt still trembling in the bone memory of their being.